At least 6 dead and about 60 injured after a sniper fire against peaceful demonstrators in the Yatounueh area in Beirut, capital of Lebanon. A fire tore through a building in the southern Taiwanese city of Kaohsiung, killing 46 people and injuring dozens of others. And also, Venezuelan authorities are set to file a complaint against Colombian President Iván Duque before the International Criminal Court for the persecution and killings of Venezuelan citizens residing in Colombia. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm their host, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. At least 6 dead and about 60 injured after a sniper fire against peaceful demonstrators in the Yatounueh area in Beirut, capital of Lebanon, on Thursday. According to reports by local media outlet Al Mayadeen, the Lebanese Army Commando Regiment reinforced its deployment in the area to contain the situation and also arrested a sniper who was in one of the buildings from where the shooting was heard. Al Mayadeen's Beirut bureau chief stated that at least 4 gunmen fired from a building in Yatounueh. She also said that the army is trying to arrest several suspects in the Yatounueh shooting. The Lebanese army issued a statement on the events in Yatounueh explaining that the protesters were exposed to bursts of gunfire as they made their way into the Adliya area of Beirut. Government troops rushed to cordon off the area of the shooting and deployed to its neighborhoods and entrances. We will provide you more details as the situation unfolds. And we move on to other topics. Continuing the policy of staunch United States support for the Israeli regime seen under his predecessor, the Biden administration is seeking to convince other states to normalize their relations with Israel. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken hosted the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates and Israel on Wednesday as part of 3-way talks aimed at expanding the normalization drive initiated by Trump. The former president considered the so-called Abraham Accords to be growing and also a crowning achievement of his administration, as the United Arab Emirates, followed shortly afterward by Bahrain and Morocco, became the first Arab state to normalize relations with Israel in decades. Trump's approach was also transactional, as he agreed to sell state-of-the-art fighter jets to the UAE and also recognized Morocco's controversial claim over the Western Sahara, moves that Biden has not changed. Syria's economy minister reported this Wednesday that up until 2020, the amount of direct and indirect losses within the country's oil sector amounted to $95 billion due to the Western-imposed conflict, occupation, and sanctions. The minister also called for foreign investment to help rebuild Syria.
The amount of direct and indirect losses until 2020 within the oil sector amount to $95 billion. As for the electricity sector, according to the exchange rate of 50 pounds to the dollar, the losses amounted to 5,000 billion Syrian pounds, which is equivalent to $100 billion in direct and indirect damages. In the coming period, Syria is going to be a big construction site, as there is a lot of destruction in many areas. This will require big efforts, and of course, the priority will be to our allies in this reconstruction process. In regard to sanctions, we have channels and mechanisms to transfer money, whether through banks or exchange companies. These channels enables us to secure Syria's needs of imports and its export revenues. There are companies that do not care about sanctions, since they do not deal with Western countries. As for companies that fear sanctions, they might use a different name, which is easy.
Now we address other topics. The World Health Organization announced a team of scientists who will study new pathogens as part of efforts aimed at preventing future pandemics.
WHO today announced the proposed members of the WHO Scientific Advisory Group for the Origins of Novel Pathogens, or SEGO. The 26 experts were selected from over 700 applications and were chosen for their world-class expertise and experience in a range of disciplines.
There was no political process associated with this selection, and we certainly need strong nations with scientific power to be part of the process, but it's their scientists we need, not their politicians.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. A fire tore through a building in the southern Taiwanese city of Kaohsiung, killing 46 people and injuring dozens of others on Thursday. According to officials, the fire broke out in the 13-story mixed-use building, raging through multiple floors before firefighters finally got it under control. Most of the deaths were on floors 7 to 11, which housed residential apartments. The first 5 floors were for commercial use but were unoccupied. Fire Chief Lee Shin-soo warned that more casualties were expected as some people may still be trapped in the residential part of the building. Local news reported that more than 100 residents, many of them senior citizens with physical disabilities, live in the building. So far, it is unclear what caused the fire, and local police were reviewing surveillance footage without ruling out arson. And the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, met with the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris in Washington on Wednesday for talks on a range of issues, including the ongoing pandemic and the climate crisis.
We face common threats together, and the world perhaps has never been more precariously placed in decades than it is now. And to the extent that we can cooperate and work together with respect to fighting the pandemic, for fighting the climate crisis, for fighting security threats, and for promoting prosperity as a basis for the engagement of all of us, then I believe that we can go forward. Similarly, we're also conscious that as we go to Glasgow, that there is a distinct risk, regrettably, that the world might not make the 1.5 degrees that we need to survive in the region. If that happens, then the conversation has to change seriously to be about adaptation, because we have to adapt to that new reality, which can literally be upon us anywhere from 12 to 20 years.
In Argentina, a group of mothers who were forcibly evicted from their homes are demanding decent housing and respect from their human rights from the government of Buenos Aires. Our correspondent, Oscar Orquera, brings us the details in the following report.
Today, at the Buenos Aires obelisk, mothers who need answers after being left in the streets ask for an audience with the chief of the city government. This comes after more than 80 mothers and 150 children who had been living in the Padre Mujica neighborhood for 3 months were evicted, with the use of bulldozers and police.
We are here to make a demand, to make a request for a dialogue with Mr. Larreta, who violently evicted us on the 13th of the last month. We are women who were living there with our children, and he burned our houses and he didn't care at all.
The events were violent, unexpected, very early in the morning, 13 days ago. The mothers and their children experienced moments of great anguish, which, according to the residents, could have been avoided with prior talks.
At 7 o'clock in the morning, the police filled the place. They started to tear everything down, to set fire to the shacks, to throw everything away. They had forgotten about the existence of the site until it became home to hundreds of families for 3 months, as if we didn't need a place to live, as if we had nothing better to do than go live in a garbage dump.
The desperation worsens as the days go by. So this Wednesday, these women decided to make their demands visible by striking one of the most symbolic points of the downtown Buenos Aires, demanding answers from the government chief and member of the Macri's Republican Proposal Party, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta.
We have not received any response. It is a lie that we are 52 families and that we have been relocated. It is also a lie that Succeeded didn't solve anything for us. 10 out of the 80 of us were called and the rest got nothing.
The housing problem is not new in the city, the capital of Argentina, and the post-COVID-19 social and labor crises are once again coming to the fore.
Oscar Orquera, TeleSUR, Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Thank you, Oscar, for your report. Now, on Wednesday, Pope Francis acknowledged that he called the Catholic Church mistakes throughout history. The comments came as indigenous peoples across Latin America mobilized to denounce the arrival of the Church to the Americas and the genocide of their ancestors on the Day of Indigenous Resistance.
Being able to announce the good news of Christ, the Savior, whilst respecting what is good and true in cultures, is no easy thing. Many mistakes have been made in evangelization process by wanting to impose only one cultural model. Sometimes violence has been a means for imposing one's own viewpoints. The freedom gained from the death and resurrection of the Lord does not contradict other cultures, but quite the contrary. It introduces a new freedom, that of the Evangelion, in each culture. It recognizes the seeds of truth and develops them to their full extent of kindness.
Now we address other topics. As finance ministers of the G20 wealthy nations and central bank governors met in the United States Capitol, demonstrators dressed as debt collectors reminded world leaders of their broken promise to contribute $100 billion a year in climate finance to developing countries. Activists on the U.S.-based nonprofit organization VAS rallied in front of the International Monetary Fund headquarters, calling on leaders from Australia, Canada, Italy and the United Kingdom to fulfill their broken promise. A delivery plan to mobilize at least $100 billion a year for climate finance of 2020 to 2025, led by Germany and Canada, is expected to be unveiled on Monday. But as the G20 finance ministers' talks started on Wednesday in Washington, D.C., there was no indication that developed nations will fulfill that commitment. Given most countries will not meet their 2020 or 2021 commitments, VAS is urging countries to commit to delivering $600 billion over 6 years up to 2025, as suggested by climate vulnerable countries. And the tropical storm Pamela moved inland over Mexico's northwest region on Wednesday after slamming into the western coast earlier in the day as a Category 1 hurricane. Pamela made landfall 40 miles north of the port of tourist city of Mazatlan. Civil defense officials said the storm's wind and rains caused minor flooding, but did little damage in the city. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said Wednesday that Pamela's winds had fallen to about 45 miles per hour by midday as it moved inland, moving northeast at 25 miles per hour. The Hurricane Center had warned of the possibility of flash floods in affected areas. The remnants of the storm were forecast to weaken as it crossed over northern Mexico and dissipated before reaching the Texas border. And the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez visited the Canary Island of La Palma on Wednesday to discuss the government's plans of investing 214 million euros for the rebuilding of the island, partly destroyed by the eruption of the Cumbre Vieja volcano.
This reconstruction plan for the island of La Palma includes more than 214 million euros. We will see exactly the final amount of this volcanological emergency, the amount that we will have to deploy for the total reconstruction and relaunch of La Palma. Today we are allocating 214 million euros to the island of La Palma and above all, focusing on different things that I am convinced will be of vital importance for palm trees and banana trees.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro announced that his government will bring the President of Colombia, Iván Duque, before the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity surrounding the persecution and killings of Venezuelan citizens in the neighboring country.
For this case, and for thousands of other murders, and for more than 860 Venezuelan migrants who have disappeared in Colombia and are still missing, the state has decided to take action on the matter and is going to accuse Iván Duque of crimes against humanity before the International Criminal Court for the persecution of Venezuelan migrants, for the promotion of hatred for the disappeared, for the forced disappearances of thousands of Venezuelan men and women who have disappeared in Colombia because of hatred.
President Maduro also stressed that the xenophobia, persecution and murders of Venezuelan citizens in Colombia are the result of a political extremism promoted by both the Colombian government and also sectors of the Venezuelan opposition.
They say that they feel rage, hate, disgust and annoyance whenever there is a Venezuelan in Colombia. Who has promoted this xenophobic, hateful, destructive attitude that has led to the disappearance of thousands of Venezuelans in Colombia? Who? The Colombian state, Mr. Iván Duque, the Colombian paramilitary, the Colombian right wing in complicity with Julio Borges, who lives in Colombia, in complicity with the extremist right wing of Julio Borges, Guaidó and Leopoldo López, who go to these countries to speak ill of the Venezuelan migrants and demand justice for the crime against these two children, for more than 1,500 Venezuelan migrants, and for the disappearance of more than 860 missing Venezuelans. It is unknown where they are.
On Wednesday, the Chilean opposition filed a constitutional accusation in a bid to impeach President Sebastián Piñera after the Pandora Papers investigation linked him to accounts and deals in a tax haven. The Chilean head of state will be investigated for his alleged involvement in bribery, tax evasion and embezzlement. The vast majority of opposition forces, despite their different political positions, have backed the impeachment move, which comes after the investigation launched by National Prosecutor Jorge Abbott that centers on the president's and his family's ties to the sale of the Dominga mining project in 2010 in the British Virgin Islands. The revelations on the president's enrichment to the detriment of the country have sparked outrage at a time when many sectors are struggling against the aggressive austerity and neoliberal policies of the Piñera government. And Chileans reacted to the opposition's move to impeach President Sebastián Piñera over the Pandora Papers revelations.
It is the most pertinent thing to do because as president he is supposed to be the example for the Chilean society.
I understand that this is not going to come to fruition. It would be great if someday the hand of justice will come to that person, Sebastián Piñera, so nefarious for this country, with the issue of the Dominga mining company. It is an absolutely political accusation in which the opposition tries to take any motive, any subterfuge to attack the current government.
In Guatemala, military veterans blocked the country's main highways this Wednesday to protest the government failing to meet their demands for financial compensation for having participated in the country's armed conflict, during which the army committed widespread widespread abuses. The protesters announced 3 days of demonstrations due to what they described as a lack of political will on the part of the Congress to approve Bill number 5664, which they call the Law of Economic Dignity for the rendering of military services during the internal armed conflict. The bill grants a one-time compensation sum for veterans of the 1960 to 1996 conflict that left an estimated 200,000 dead, 45,000 missing, and 100,000 Guatemalans displaced. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.